my God cannot do. There's nothing 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 my God cannot do. Of your word, if you said it, we believe it. Oh, 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 if you said it, we believe it. You're a man of your word. You won't start with me. If he said it, we believe it. Cause you're a man of your word. If he said it, we believe it.
Come on, everybody say it now.
Oh, 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 oh. If he said it, we believe it. You're a man of your word. If you said it, we believe it. Cause you're a man of your word. If you said it, we believe it. Oh, 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 oh. If you said it, we believe it. Cause you're a man of your word.
Let me check in real quick, because when we started, the host told us to take a little extra time, but we're taking all of it. I just want to know how we doing. Okay, now. He said that to a good house. So listen, we'll teach you guys a little something. No, go ahead and have a seat for a second. We'll teach you a song. It's actually not teaching you a song. Here's the thing. One time we were in a rehearsal, and it was like a 6-hour rehearsal. No, that was real. It was a real thing. And we somehow got caught on the word one and the oneness of God, the
as surely as I know my name, I know one thing that'll never change. I love you. I love you. I love you. Just as surely as I know my name, I know one thing that'll never change. Just as surely as I know my name, I know one thing that'll never change. Just as surely as I know my name, I know one thing that'll never change. I love you. Just as surely as I know my name, I know one thing that'll never change. Just as surely as I know my name, I know one thing that'll never change. Just as surely as I know my name, I know one thing that'll never change. I love you. Speaking of one, speaking of one, speaking of one, speaking of one. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love. On and on and on and on it goes, for it overwhelms and satisfies my soul. And I never ever have to be afraid. One thing remains. One thing remains. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love. Better is one day in your courts. Better is one day in your house. Better is one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere. Better is one day in your courts. Better is one day in your house. Better is one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere. Better is one day. Better is one day. Better is one day. Better is one day. Speaking of one, 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 all my life, till the end of my days, I will share my love, and you know you have my praise. You're the best one decision that I ever made, and I wouldn't trade the world for you. No, I wouldn't trade the world for you. All my life, till the end of my days, I will share my love, and you know you have my praise. You're the best one decision that I ever made, and I wouldn't trade the world for you. No, I wouldn't trade the world for you. All my life, till the end of my days, I will share my love, and you know you have my praise. You're the best one decision that I ever made, and I wouldn't trade the world for you. No, I wouldn't trade the world for you. No.
Good evening. You did to Michelle again. I'm in that space where I just want to go in where I can't go. Wait for that Pentecostal move of the Spirit where I get a voice.
You can be a rapper.
Yeah, that's it. Stillwater, let's give another applause to Stillwater. You know that it's a special place when you can call on people and just know that they're gonna be there for you, and they're gonna deliver, and they're gonna be in that space. And talent is gonna not be what drives it, but spirit and life and meaning is. And when we made the call to say, Michelle, can can Stillwater come and lead worship for us? One, when we're thinking about who, much like when we're thinking about workshop leaders, we thought, there's a select folks that you know that they're already family, and they can just come be in the space, and it just feels right, and it's been 20 years or so, and it's just, I have goosebumps. It's just a meaningful thing, and for those that are new to CCDA and are joining us this weekend, trying to figure this out this weekend, today, trying to figure this out a little bit, I think for me, one of the things that CCDA has offered to this, 27-year-old white guy was a place to walk through life and connect with people and become community and become family. We heard earlier from Joyce, become a tribe that's just there for you, that's just sits in similar space, that has different skills, different gifts, different history, different passions, different wrestles, makes different mistakes, but just kind of walks in community with you over time. That's what you get the opportunity to walk into. And it's the space that we had hoped to create today, to welcome you into. Some of us are old friends, some of us are new friends. Some of us have been doing this work all over the country or the world and have a similar connection to this thing. This balance between the work of justice and the passion for knowing Jesus.
Yeah.
The commitment to the gospel and the commitment to being right in community. And just kind of walking it out. So I hope it's been a good day. I hope it's been a good day. Derek's going to welcome our panel in a minute. And we were expecting to have JP back with us to share some more words. which gave us room to say, Michelle, JP can't be with us, can you guys just take us in a little deeper and spend a little more time in worship, so thank you. But we thought we had room for maybe 2 or 3, like 2-sentence shout-outs of what today has been. It's always dangerous, because we need 2 or 3 2-sentence shout-outs. But if anybody just has something burning, that an aha moment, or something that today has meant to you, would you stand and just kind of shout it out?
I wish more people could have been here to leave tomorrow. I wish more people could have been here from our organizations. I really feel like we got a lot of perspective that we needed.
Excellent, excellent. We keep trying to shout out. That means you get to just shout.
It was the song My Day. The last song was the song My Day.
A song of my day. I love it. Love it.
I love how leadership was connected to Jesus and his mission. I thought that was like painted vividly.
Nice. We'll do 2 more. Because you're being so good.
Refreshments and affirmation from those who've been on the same leg of the journey.
Refreshment, affirmation. If we had a lot more time, Michelle, I'd ask you to come up with another song together with those one. We've been in a couple of camps with Michelle where she would just ask the audience, kids, tell me how was your day? And they would give a word or 2, and then she would get a beat going to the background, and then she would write a song that we would sing for the rest of the week from the experiences that we had today. So thank you for shouting out and just sharing what this day has meant to you.
Thank you so much. I think. Switch.
Oh, you gotta switch. Or the switch.
I think she was saying switch, but it's good. Well, we praise God for this day, don't we? It's been good. It's been good. It's good to be together. We certainly are appreciative, and we want to end on a high note. We certainly thank God for all that we've heard, our plenary speakers this morning, and all this transpired. We are so grateful for you for coming out and experiencing this with us. We also want to express a special word again, and we cannot thank not just Dr. Perkins, but the whole Perkins family. And the sisters are here. Let's give them a We're here in Seattle together, but they're actually my neighbors. We're just up the street from you on exit 9 in Jackson, Mississippi. But we appreciate their ministry and legacy over the years. We're going to have our panelists. I'm going to introduce our group this evening. Before our evening plenary speaker, we have a special conversation that we want to engage in the form of a panel discussion on leadership transitions within our organizations. As we prepare for this space, we recognize the opportunity we have with the Perkins family, as well as being able to identify some local leaders in our midst here in the Pacific Northwest. And so for this panel, it is our hope that we can engage in a conversation with active leaders who are in the midst of instituting transition within their organizations. And just to explore what this can look like and what space that may leave for new leadership and vision to be cultivated as we move forward. And for newer organizations like Acts on Stage, forward thinking for what structures or systems could be set up from the start to ensure smooth transitions as organizations mature. So our panelists today, Michelle Lang-Raymond, artist and nonprofit entrepreneur, who not only is our anointed worship leader today, but also recently founded Acts on Stage, and she is the executive director here in Seattle. Acts on Stage is a new community theater focused on centering the voice, talents, and initiatives of people of color and creatives of faith. Michelle has years of experience in community development and pastoral ministry as a singer, songwriter, worship leader, and most recently, campus pastor at Warner Pacific University. Michelle is joined by panelists, Elizabeth Perkins. Elizabeth has spent time in Africa, ministering and serving with the Navigators. Her personal goal is simple yet profound, to help the next generations encounter and follow Jesus to bless a broken world. Amen. With passion and within her purpose, she is experienced in helping to establish youth ministry and mentoring programs. At the Perkins Foundation, Elizabeth is the program and mission director. She coordinates efforts for the foundation and mission team, internship opportunities, children-adult programs, summer arts camp, and the Perkins Justice Pilgrimage. Priscilla Perkins, who is also here with us, holds experience in family law and legal research, specializing in the social foundations of education and the cognitive development of children. She has traveled and researched private school models around the country and developed an inner-city Christian school of the Ron Bay Preparatory School, also serving as its first headmaster. Priscilla is the development director at the Perkins Foundation and coordinates the president's speaking schedule and Dr. Perkins' schedule as well as handles the intellectual property, sponsorship, and the Perkins Institutes. We certainly want to welcome them again to Seattle. And then facilitating our discussion tonight is our own Steve Berry. Steve is the Executive Director of Urban Impact, and many of you will be there for our Go and Learn on tomorrow. It's a Christian community development organization with a passion for strengthening families, raising leaders, and making disciples of Jesus. A community ministry veteran of 25 plus years, Steve's heart is the development of dynamic, multi-ethnic, community-focused ministries that create godly, lifelong disciples and urban leaders. Did you know that Steve is an ordained minister? Amen. From George Fox University. Amen. Steve has worked for various Christian organizations, including Reach Out Expeditions, Youth for Christ, Campus Life, Seattle's Union Gospel Mission, World Vision, Vision Youth, and Emerald City Outreach Ministries. And we certainly thank God for his leadership in this community. In fact, although I've been acquainted and heard and know of his work over the years, I was blessed to be able, when I came to this community, to connect with folks just like Steve and others who have been a part of CCD work for years. And so it's a pleasure. And I want you to take a time to join me in welcoming not only Steve Berry, but our panelists as well.
Thank you, Derek. I tried to get him out of the bio. I don't know where you found that. So let me set the stage a little bit. We recognized that we were going to have the Perkins sisters with us, and that JP is in transition, although, you know, I think he's going to run this thing from heaven, you know, or here. The energy that, you know, I dream. Somebody said, I hope I have the passion to minister. I said, I hope I can just walk like JP walks at his age. So it's just such a joy. But we know he's in transition. I get to play the role of this beautiful Samoan sister in the lower right-hand corner there, Pat Thompson, who couldn't be with us tonight. Michelle was going to be the facilitator, and Pat is also in a transition season where she was handing off the organization that she founded, yes, Foundation of White Center, to a group of Polynesian young people that were going to lead, that have been leading alongside of her, and she's kind of working through this transition. So we were really excited to have the conversation. Pat couldn't be here, so Michelle said, I'll be on the panel, And
I didn't say it that enthusiastically.
You said, oh, am I facilitating? Okay, I'll be on the panel, and Kanisha and I kind of put our heads together and said, okay, I'll facilitate. And here's the stage I want to set. You've been invited to my living room. I am also of later years and thinking about transition, and I am equally as founder-esque as, Pastor Harvey, who I work with, who Michelle has worked for, who many of you know very well. And so put on this cap. I need you to help me think through my own transition, how you guys are navigating the transition with your father, as Michelle has setting up an organization. She's been actually kind of pioneering some thoughts on what does it look like to set up a new organization where future legacy transitions are natural. And I want you to kind of help me work through some of these pieces. All right? To start it off, this conversation in Christian community development, when I came into it from a youth work perspective, and they were saying at that time, if you really want to be effective in youth work, you got to work 4 to 5 years, kind of walk a whole generation of young people kind of through high school years until they were kind of coming back and volunteering. And one of my mentors, Russ Knight, out of Chicago, grabs me and he says, okay, Steve, if you're serious about this, told me 2 things. He said, if you're going to do this in an ethnic community, you got to land yourself in an ethnic church. That was one of the things he told me. And you got to just get rooted. I don't care if you like it or don't like it. Just get under the leadership of an ethnic pastor. It's a black man. He was saying a black pastor because he knew where I was going. And then he said, and you got to think about 15 to 25 years. That longevity is critical to see. He said, if you're thinking of a high school generation, just think about a generation. Work in this work long enough till you're working with somebody's kids, kind of one of your kids' kids. And we've seen that happen. Michelle is living that out in her work. We've been able to live that out in our work. So when you think of CCD work, speak for a minute about the space you're in right now, and how you see the importance of longevity and transition. Does that question make sense? Just give people a little bit of background of where you're sitting today. Are you on? Make sure they're all on too. Yours is a red light.
Sure.
Everybody mic check here for a second.
Now, your question was...
Give us a little background of where you're sitting right now. Like, how is this, Dad's getting on, and you're looking at transition. You want to continue the work, but you're also valuing the longevity.
Right. For us, Elizabeth and I, we grew up in this, and when I'm looking back at it, I was looking at your question, I was looking back and thinking, these 2 little girls that were playing while the civil rights is going on around us, while our parents are doing, pioneering so many things, we didn't anticipate that we would be sitting here today. I don't think anybody did, and we didn't even prepare for it, but God was preparing for it. And I think that he has given us what we need for this time and this season. And so we are just willing vessels. And I think that that's so important for leaders to know that it's not about them. It's all about Jesus, and it's all about justice. And so we are just willing vessels to do God's will. We want to be servant leaders and be leaders who, like my parents, who stick it out through thick and thin, and watch the generations grow up and give them a love for their community and educate young people. And so I feel honored. I feel choked up even being here, because this is my tribe. I grew up with this with you. So we're just happy to be here. So.
Okay, number one, for me,
Daddy's gonna die with his boots on. And so it's the transition part for us is, well, for us has been difficult because we know that people are not coming to see us. And so, and we know they're coming to see him. And so the transition period has been like, okay, our egos, we have to check our egos at the door. If God had put us in this and our egos were out front, then we wouldn't be here because we already know who they coming to see and who they want to see. And so, but anyway, our mission, part of our mission, me and Priscilla and Deborah's mission since we've come back and become co-presidents together has been to help our parents finish well. And so one of the things that we do, that's fine. One of the things that we do is, she's traveled. Before the pandemic, she was traveling everywhere with him, making sure that he was fine. And you saw that. But I'm saying all that to say, the transition is hard, and you have to make sure that this is the place that God wants you, because you can't be weak. You can't be weak, and you can't be all in your feelings. It ain't the circus. Yeah, it ain't
I'm at the beginning of a thing as opposed to the place where you pass it off. Just a little backstory about Acts on Stage. So a couple of years ago, I had a gentleman approach me from a church and ask, did I have an innovative ministry idea that I wanted to launch in the community. And I was working, like the bio said, I was a campus pastor at Warner Pacific University down in Portland, Oregon. And so when he came and approached me and said, hey, we're looking for people who are doing innovative ministries already, and we just want to partner with them. We don't want to continue to just pour money into traditional churches. We want to find people who are already in the community doing things and partner with that as ministry. And so I asked him, what do you, when you say innovative ministry model, what are you talking about? And he said, I don't know, you tell me. And I was like, nope, I don't want no parts of that. Whatever, if you can't explain it, if you can't describe it, I don't want to do it. I'm going to keep my nice cushy job at the university. I've already been a youth pastor for decades, and so I'm going to keep my literal stained glass office up at the college. And it took 2 years of him asking me, this question for me to I don't know, I just started having epiphanies and revelations that I had long dreamed about launching a theater or having a theater that had ministerial components to it, right? That it did what traditional theaters do, but that it also had ministry at the core, ministry at the foundation of it. Because I had long held the belief that the arts were divine, or are divine, and that the church was underutilizing the arts. And so it took 2 years of somebody coming to ask me if I wanted to do something innovative for me to realize that God had already planted something innovative in my heart. I had just sort of become lulled into traditional model of ministry, that something had to shake me to remember that ministry was not just inside, the church walls. And so that's kind of how our theater got launched, was for me to actually get kind of shaken and awakened to remember all the things that I had known so much from messages and books and words from your dad. And so that's how Acts on Stage got started. So we're in a place now where we have a theater in White Center. White Center is unincorporated King County. So it's in this area that is kind of forgotten already. And so we moved into a space in that area. And one of the things before we did anything, whether it was tangible or intangible, one of our values, one of our high values and our high priorities was that we wanted to create something that people would be proud of. Whatever we're doing, whether it's spiritual or natural, doesn't matter. We wanted to create a theater space and ministry and work and relationships and even a look. We wanted even how our space looked. We wanted it to be something that people were proud of, because we felt like part of what was creating the wedge between people belonging to a thing or not was if they felt proud to be associated with it or not. Right. And so that could be from whether that's your church, your job, your family. It's like if you don't feel proud to say that's us, that's ours, that's what we wanted, then you don't want to, then you won't commit to that. And so for us, one of the things that was I know you're saying foundational in a different way, but one of the things that was foundational for us in terms of our values was that it is something that people could be proud of so that we could have a strategy for it being here 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 years. Because we felt like if it wasn't something that people were going to be proud of at the beginning of it, then it wouldn't be here 20 and 30 years later. And so that's been part of the foundation soil that is in the work that we're doing.
So at Urban Impact, we're in a season right now where we're at that kind of preparing for transition stage. You guys are in a very similar stage. You're preparing for transition. And I appreciate we just got to, it's not about us. It's, we know why we're here and we understand our place. But how do you see your role changing? And what do you need from JP? What do you need from Dad? What do you need from kind of founder that sets you up for this transition the best? Obviously with respect to who he is, what is it you really need? And then for Michelle, the twist will be, what do you want to put in place now so that the transitions are better prepared for?
Well, for us, we know that we are not going to be imitators. We're not John Perkins. And the gifts that God gave us are so radically different. His life was so radically different from our cushy, American, growing up with two-parent home. It was so different. And so we are just going to use what God has given us to move forward, because it's not going to look the same, but we want to keep the same vision, because the vision is important to keep. How you do it, it may change, but we want to always stay centered on our vision and to inspire and equip Christians for reconciliation work and development. So that's what we want to stay focused on.
So I still want to dig a little deeper. But what do you need? What do you need from the founder? I'm thinking, what do I need from Harvey, or what does my team need from me to prepare them for this transition to be as smooth as possible?
I think that God has given us what we need, and it's our Father in heaven that we need to look to for the things that we need. Our Father, He didn't have a father. And so him knowing how to do all these things, he's doing exactly what God wants him to do as a preacher. He's a Bible teacher. But expecting for him to give us the things that we need to continue this journey, that probably, I don't think that's going to actually happen. I think we look to our Heavenly Father for that. And I think that he never fails us. And I think that God, He intended for this to happen exactly the way that it's happening. So.
Our mother, on the other hand, she has been a real mentor for us.
She's carried this work. And she held down the home front while JP was all out on the road, It's like we grew up with our mother. Our dad was always, away. So our mother is just a woman of great faith and one that has poured a lot into us as well. So some of you know my mom very well, and she's not able to, travel and be with us, but she's always with us in prayer and in our hearts. So we know that, the transition is going to happen. And one of the things that we're doing is we're going to continue the work that we're doing in Mississippi, doing the pilgrimages. So we're changing things up a bit because of who we are, and we're trying to figure out how can we continue to do this work with what God has given us. And so, but one of the things that's happening right now is that Seattle Pacific was a flagship, is a flagship, and it started something with all these different schools, and so we're just involved with so many different colleges and seminaries who are endowing fellowships and scholarships at their universities, and so our job is to continue to make sure that we are drum majors for those universities, and so we're just thankful for Kanisha and for the John Perkins Center and for Bill Eden, who came down to Jackson and started the John Perkins Center, and so we're just excited to keep going, and then we're setting it up right now so that we can pass it off to someone else. We want to make sure that the ministry is healthy, financially and a good life, and so we are really concerned with that. And so
in the room this afternoon, I was telling her all that, so she's just saying it out loud.
We were talking about innovators, innovators, what does that mean? You're just pioneers, you just don't know what you're doing. But you have the faith to keep going and to trust God to give you what you need on the journey. So there's no roadmap for how to do this. You just have to be faithful and trust in God.
Are you John's daughter?
I can't help myself.
You're with family. Michelle, how would you, what are you putting in place for transition to be smooth?
Yeah, one of the things that we're learning is that we have to do a lot of teaching. A lot of times when you start something, right, when you pioneer something, whether it's of a traditional thing or an innovative thing, a lot of times when you start something, you just start sort of doing the work, right? You just like get your building, you get your stuff, you start your program, and you start doing and just doing and going and going and going. And what we're learning is that you have to teach as you do it, as a practice of setting your foundation. Because a lot of times what happens is you'll have volunteers come to help you build, and they will do anything you ask them to do, but they don't know why. And so the longevity of them doing that, or the heart from which they do it, has a stunted growth, right? Because they're like, I'm just going to put chairs over here in this way, or I'm just going to put decorations or whatever, or I'm just going to do what you tell me to do. And they'll do that, but if they don't understand the philosophy or the ideology or the theology from which you are doing your work, then you are limiting the capacity for that to be a long-term effort and endeavor. And so for us as a theater, one of our core values is that the arts are divine. We believe that the arts are a divine gift from God. And so when we talk about putting on a show, we're not just talking about what is the most entertaining thing we can do. We're talking about how do we infuse and embed meaning into what we're doing, because it can't just be a performance, it can't just be a show. It needs to have, if we think the arts are divine, then where does the sacred thing happen in the work that we're doing? And you assume people get that because they come volunteer with you, or because they come work for you or whatever, or because they partner with you, or because they even give you money. You think people know that, and they don't. You have to pause and start to teach those kinds of things. And again, sometimes it's theology, sometimes it's ideology, sometimes it's just skills. I have a young lady who works for me, and for the last 10 months or so, I've been talking to her a lot about, I think it's Stephen Covey's 4 quadrants of time management. And I say to her on a regular basis that we got to get out of quad 1. Quad 1 is like the frenzy and the chaos. We have to get into quad 2 because we can't create divine art if we're always rushing and throwing it together. We have to do it in such a way that we give the sacred an opportunity to actually be a part of the work that we're doing. And you can just sort of go about your day and just do stuff and think that she gets that, think that that 25-year-old gets that. But if she's never actually sat and heard someone teach or lean in with her, then all you have is a very energetic 25-year-old. Right. And you'll have her maybe a year, but you won't have her for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. You're not actually creating longevity in your work. And so one of the things that we are really learning is that we have to pause, even when it's inconvenient. And it is often, because deadlines happen and we got stuff to do, right? So a lot of times it's really inconvenient. And it's not just the people that like work and serve on your team, but it's even the audience that we serve. Like right now, we're still just 3 years old. And so I still do an audience address before every show, because we want our audience to know that we think the arts are divine, that we think creativity is a divine gift from God. And so hopefully when you come to an Acts on Stage show, you feel something sacred, you feel something meaningful, even if it's the Wizard of Oz, even if it's Cinderella, even if it's something that's just foo-foo and whatever, we still want you to know that we created this with the intention of you having a divine experience with God. We even say that to our audience because we have to teach what we're doing. We can't assume that people get that, and we know, and we've seen it. I've seen it over the course of my other work, that when you take time to teach those things, even when those people move on to other things, that theology, that ideology, that workmanship is still alive wherever they go.
That's good. That's beautiful. I love hearing that, and if I can put words in your mouth a little bit, that Mom was mentoring. She was teaching what Michelle's describing. She was intentionally taking moments to teach, and that we need to be kind of conscious of who are the kids in the room, like who are the kids playing in the room that are learning from Mom. That, you know, Vera Mae was a huge influence on so many in the movement, and yet she wasn't doing it from the stage. She wasn't doing it from the platform necessarily. She was doing it from the life that she modeled for you all, for many of us, that she just continued in the work. It's intentional. It's case.
There's this book called The Art of Gathering, or The Art of the Gathering, I think. And I would encourage anybody that calls people together on a regular basis to read this book, because it does this teaching thing, right? So with the young lady that I was talking about, one time we were doing an event, and we were talking about how to set up the room. And we had already talked through what the event was for and all, you know, what the goal was and all that. And so when she started setting things up, she set things up kind of like this, just straight rows. And I felt bad because I had to come in and tell her, we got to do this room. We got to change this whole room. She's like, why? I was like, what's the reason that we're doing this event? And it was about people being together, talking, sharing, whatever. I said, so you have to create the space that helps people do that, right? You have to put into your space what your mission is, what your motivation is. And even stuff like that, like I can't assume that she knows that until we pause and take a moment to do it. So it's stuff like that I'm talking about.
That's good. It reminds me of, and just a side note, if you can ever get Michelle to come teach a seminar or a workshop to your team on how to set up space, our churches, our clinics, our youth programs, that idea that she just kind of dropped a little piece in, that we have to be intent, like the space you create is critical in the creation of what you're trying to do. And so many times we have this idea and this vision and this passion that we want to create, but we forget the space. I remember you doing that talk about like the mood in a jazz club, and they want people to feel connected, so you have to say, excuse me, to get to that chair open and the front table in the front, you got to literally impose on people to get to your table. But that's intentional. It creates a mood, it creates a vibe that helps create the space. As you guys think, and this is my last question, as you guys think about the future, what are you thinking about intentionally that you need to do today in your organizations? So be really practical, organization-minded for me for a minute. What do you need to do in the organization to really move into that future and move into some of the things you have in your heart as you transition in leadership?
I believe that, and my dad has always told us, is that friendship is one of the highest human virtues. And becoming friends with people and loving people is a way to continue to have people come to you, and for us to continue to show people the way. And so what we want to do is continue to gain friends and to continue to love, because love, as my dad has always said, and Switchfoot, is the final fight. And so love is what it is. It's all about. So we want to continue to do that. And there's so many people who are surrounding us and helping us. We're not doing this on our own. We have a strong board of directors and a lot of friends who are helping us along the way. So we're just thankful for that. Those things are intentional. You have to make sure to have a board of directors who will tell you the truth, about things, and they have the time, talent, and treasure to give to the organization. So.
In the same way as you're thinking of setting up space, what are you setting up in your organization that's going to, what are you doing today that's setting you up for the future?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm having to get comfortable with is inviting people into the work, right? I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I hope it's not just me, but I feel like when you think about the work that you're doing, you think it's so incredible that people are just going to see how incredible it is, and they're just going to run to you to do it. Do you know what I'm saying? You just think it's just going to be like a movie, and everybody just, as soon as you put something on Facebook, people are just going to sign up for it. And that's just not how it works. And so that puts you in a position, sometimes an uncomfortable position, where you have to actually invite people to participate in what you're doing. And sometimes that feels, I don't know, that just feels wonky. Sometimes it feels like self-promotion, and you're like, I don't want to be that person, right? And then sometimes it feels like you're begging, and you're like, I don't want to be that person. And so I really had to retool my mind to think, I have to invite people into what we're doing, and not separate myself from feeling like it's self-promotion or begging. But a lot of times people are just waiting to be attached to something or to be invited into it. Sure. And the difference is you doing it, you actually inviting people. If I can just share a story really quick. So we're in production on a show right now. And so it's just been a really busy time. And so we've been sending out newsletters and emails and stuff like that, right? And so, when you send out, we use constant contact. When you send out constant contact stuff and you have big swings in your numbers, constant contact will send you an email telling you what's happening with your account, right? If you get new subscribers or you get unsubscribers, right? So I woke up the day after opening night and I got an email from Constant Contact, and it tells you who your new subscribers are, because I just invited everybody in the audience that night, the night before, to come on this journey with us, right? So I was like, yeah, I want to see what those numbers look like. But I also want to see who unsubscribed, just because that number matters too, right? So I look at the unsubscribed, and the very first name on the unsubscribe is...
Is that the John Perkins?
It wasn't John Perkins. I'm going to add John Perkins, so don't tell him. But the very first name was, I told him I was going to say this publicly at some point, so it's okay. The very first name was this guy, Kevin, at Kev on Stage. Now, if you know Kev on Stage, he's a Christian comedian, right? And he has a huge following, and he's a personal friend of mine. And so the very first name on there to unsubscribe is Kev at Kev on Stage. And I was like, what? Right? And so I literally pick up my phone and I text him. And I say, I am devastated. I said, I know I am not an international famous comedian. I'm just doing a theater in Seattle. But I am devastated that you don't want to be on this journey with me opening a little theater in Seattle. So he sends me a message right back. He sends me an audio message, cracking up. And he goes, Michelle, I'm so sorry. He goes, I'm unsubscribing from everything because I just get too many of them, blah, 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 blah. And he says, one of my worst fears is that one of my friends would see me unsubscribe. Unsubscribe. And so I text him back and I was like, well, I just wanted to affirm your fears. And so he says, just sign me back up. And I was like, no, I said, said, I'll give you a little break. I'll sign you back up in September, right? I said, or, I just had this light bulb moment. I was like, or you can become a patron and make a monthly donation, and I'll just give your tickets away because you're not coming to the show anyway. He immediately says, sign me up for that. So I turned an unsubscribe into a $1,200 donation. Right? And it really does take, sometimes people they're just on that verge. It's not just about money, it's about other stuff too. Sometimes it's really just this very thin line between you inviting people to your work and you just staying back and saying, I hope they come. Sometimes the difference between them coming or not is just you giving the invitation for them to come. And so for us, we're trying to build longevity in what we're doing by inviting people to it, not assuming that people are just going to think what we're doing is so great. We actually have to open our mouth, open our heart, and risk whatever that thing is. We have to risk whatever it is and say, hey, here's what's happening. I hope you want to come, or I invite you to come be a part of it.
That's brilliant. I had a friend recently, I was fussing at him. I said, why did you land on so-and-so's board? You know, kind of, and he said, you never asked. And I thought, you know, we assume that that people are gonna put their stuff out there to us, and they're just waiting for invitation. You get the last word. You got it?
Like Priscilla said, we have a board that is helping us with our strategic plan, and it's all about our vision and our mission. And like she also said about how our gifts are different. And so in doing that plan, one of the things that we're doing is making sure that our gifts and our talents fit in the mission and in the plan. So that's the way we're trying to, you know, do that.
Someone told me you have not because you ask not. There you go. So, and it's not about us. So asking someone for something, it's not about me. I'm not even in it. I'm just doing something for God here. You know, it passes right over me. So I'm just a messenger.
Let's thank our panel.
Thank you so much. Was great to already hear so much already this evening from our panel discussion and little nuggets. And so I just want to come up here to be able to introduce our speaker for tonight. It is my pleasure, though, to introduce to you someone whom I get to call friend, and I have the honor to work with in our communities. She is someone who has, in such gentle and profound ways, caused me to pause, like asking a group, have you ever thought about your worldview? She is someone who utilizes worldview and theology of land to help bridge Native and non-Native cultures. Lenore, 3 stars, earned her BA from Fort Lewis College in Colorado, then completed a federal civil rights career in Seattle, Washington. She is retired and now resides in Spokane as an active grandmother to her 2 grandkids, which is where she began her graduate studies. She earned an MA through the North American Institute of Indigenous Theological Studies at Portland Seminary, George Fox University in Oregon. Lenore serves as a facilitator for the annual Journey to Mosaic trip, a faith-based racial reconciliation experience in the Pacific Northwest with the Covenant Church. She speaks and writes from a Native perspective on decolonizing theology and racial reconciliation, and serves on boards related to her interest in justice, the local community, Indigenous issues, and a discipleship of creation care. And so I'm happy to invite her up to be with us tonight. And so help me welcome Lenore, 3 stars.
Well, thank you for staying here. Thank you, Matthew. Well, greetings, Mitakayapi. Before I introduce myself, or is that not? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Greetings, Mitakuyapi. Before I introduce myself, I'd like to observe a protocol of respect that is practiced by Indigenous peoples everywhere in the world, a land acknowledgement. And by land, I mean the plants and the water and the creatures. But we heard Kanisha give SPU's land acknowledgement earlier, and it is a fine honoring of Coast Salish people, so I won't do that again. But I'd like to dissuade any notion that it's a superficial exercise to acknowledge the original hosts of ancestral lands wherever you are. As a Lakota living in Spokane, I'm also a guest living in the homelands of the Spokane people, and I honor their ancient relationship with the land. So why is it important to recognize Indigenous hosts and their homelands? Because they are still here. History and politics and Disney would erase them, but the land remembers them. The land is a witness that their ancestors lived here in a reciprocal relationship for millennia. By Western standards, they can be placed in the area 13,000 years ago, archaeological evidence. By Indigenous wisdom, they have always lived here. They were created here. Moreover, a proper land recognition is essential for relationship and reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples because it contradicts the ideology of the doctrine of Christian discovery that denied Indigenous peoples their dignity and their land. So let the truth be heard for healing. Now may I introduce myself. My name is Lenore 3 Stars. I'm Oglala Lakota, which is one of the 7 bands of the Lakota that make up the Teton division of the Oceti Sakowin. And the Oceti Sakowin is the 7 council fires, also known as the Great Sioux Nation. My father was Oglala Lakota, born on the Pine Ridge Reservation, where I was also born. My mother is Minikoju Lakota, one of the other 7 bands of Lakota, from the Cheyenne River Reservation. Our Lakota ancestral lands include Hesapa, the Black Hills of South Dakota, the sacred site where our creation story lives. So I take time to introduce myself in terms of kinship, because in Lakota culture, the Tioshbaye, the family system, is foundational. It shapes our kinship roles in traditional society. When I speak to groups, I try to bridge native and non-native understanding. I know that when other natives ask me, where are you from? What they're really asking me is, who are your people? I am Oglala Lakota of the Tituwa Oyate, who have a land relationship with Hesapa. That sense of place is very important to native identity. So I almost always talk about an Indigenous worldview and how it relates to a theology of the land, because I think that is really important to cross-cultural understanding. Sometimes I share a bit of my own story because it may help you see through my lens an Indigenous perspective of the gospel story. There's no such thing as a culture-free gospel. We all come from somewhere that shapes our worldview and forms the lens through which we see and experience life. We all have worldviews. When I called you Mitakuyapi, my relatives, I was expressing a Lakota worldview, a way of being that we call Mitakuyasi. Mitakuyasi translates to all my relations, and the meaning is that we are all related. We're related to Creator, we're related to each other, and we are related to all creation, all parts of creation, including the non-human parts, the land, the creatures, and even the stars. When we call all parts of creation our relatives, we are drawing respect into that relationship. Many friends have told me that their tribes also have this same understanding, this same worldview in their own language. They'll say, oh yeah, in my language we call it this. In this worldview, we have a responsibility to be a good relative. when right relationship between relatives is broken, and you know when that happens, it's our duty to find a way to restore it, to bring balance and harmony, because that's what a good relative does. So what makes us related? Scripture supports this way of thinking. For instance, in Genesis 28, Creator made a promise to Jacob. All the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and your offspring. And Romans 8 tells us that the Spirit of God brought about our adoption as children of God. The Lakota creation story says in part that Ea, the spirit of or force of creation that has no gender, made all parts of creation bit by bit using its blood, and that made us relatives. So I was an adult when I said yes to Creator Jesus, not understanding that for the next 20-some years I would be formed by Euro-Western Christianity, a religion with a history of imposing a Euro-cultural template for civilizing and Christianizing Native peoples. So I learned how to be an Orthodox white Christian woman who knew correct beliefs. Over time, though, I became aware that I didn't fit in. My theology was Eurocentric, but the rest of me wasn't. I began asking Jesus, couldn't I follow you as a Lakota woman? I yearned to know what that could be like. The affirmative answer came when I learned about a seminary offering Indigenous theological studies taught by Indigenous instructors who had already been through the same spiritual struggle that I was having, and they did something about it. So I went, and it saved my faith life. I was relieved to learn that most of my spiritual stress and cultural conflict stemmed from a difference in worldviews. So I wasn't having a faith crisis, I was having a clash of worldviews. I learned that generally Western Christianity is shaped by a Western European worldview with Hellenistic or Greek influences. One's mind and beliefs had more meaning than physical experience or what one does. I saw that theology is often more what you believe or think and not what you do. So this worldview conflicts with an Indigenous worldview, which is integrated and holistic. The way you live is what you believe. An Indigenous worldview doesn't have the Gnostic dualism that separates spiritual and material realities. Indigenous stories and teachings are moral. They show us how to be a good relative. My clash of worldviews led me to decolonize my theology, although I didn't know that's what it was called then. I had reached the point where the dissonance between correct religious beliefs and Indigenous thinking became too stressful for me to ignore. A few examples of this are kingdom analogies. Kings and kingdoms have no basis in a native cultural context. So I wondered, couldn't we express what that is supposed to mean in a way that does not imply empire or conquest? I came to Christianity from a zeitgeist of college activism against broken treaties, so conquest language wasn't sitting well. Thanks to Randy Woodley's book, Shalom in the Community of Creation, I can now think of kingdom as Shalom Kingdom. Another example is exegeting Genesis with man as the pinnacle of creation. With dominion overall, I think I lost me. With hierarchical power to treat Earth as a commodity or resource colony rather than as a relative. As we look around us, we see that this Western economic worldview is not sustainable, and it's destructive. We have created a perfect storm for climate disaster. This example I just heard recently, this world is not our home, we're just passing through it. This worldview devalues the sacredness of creation and our responsibility to Earth. Winona LaDuke was spot on when she said, in Christianity, the people and the land are no longer relatives, so it doesn't matter what we do here. because salvation is in the next world. So let them mine and extract here. There are many dualisms in Western Christianity: heaven versus hell, individualism versus community, sacred versus secular, all stressful to my faith life. For instance, I learned, against my cultural upbringing, that individual intellectual competition was a high value in school. I should raise my hand and draw attention to myself to demonstrate that I was smarter than somebody else. This individualistic value carries over into the workplace and into the church. It contradicts the Indigenous value that community is essential. What I learn and do should make me a good relative. What is good for me should be good for my family and my community. If my theology does not make me a good relative, a good neighbor, then I need better theology. Church taught me that it was idolatry, it was pagan to consider an eagle feather sacred, or a native song or a dance sacred, because only Jesus can be sacred. Missiologists, please understand that cultural reverence is not the same thing as worshiping a God. Without cultural competency in these things, Western judgments of syncretism are ethnocentric. The thinking that your culture is the standard for all culture smacks of colonialism. John 3:8 says that the Spirit is free and it goes where it wills, including into Indigenous cultures. These kinds of propositional truths told me that there must be something wrong with my native culture and with me being Indian. I didn't find my cultural identity in the church, and it became one more place like the public schools I had grown up in, where I learned to accommodate my native identity to whiteness. In fact, I learned to assimilate myself. And isn't that how oppression works? I became a tool in my own oppression and blamed myself for it. So of course it was inevitable that one day I would want to follow Jesus from my real context of being native. The Western Church was offering me a theology of assimilation when I needed a theology of wholeness. To quote Franciscan Sister Archambault, a Lakota nun, there is neither beauty nor justice in a gospel wrapped in European culture. The moment Christianity becomes real for First Nations is when it is incarnated and accepted into their worldview, and not until then. Though I hadn't yet heard that term, decolonization, I knew that I wanted to exfoliate those layers of my Western formation that came from an outside culture until I got to the Creator who knows me. Natives often refer to Creator, and I came to understand Jesus as Creator. The presence and agency of Jesus in the act of creation is affirmed in John 1:3. Through him all things were made. And in Colossians 1:16, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. All things have been created through him and for him. So my experience has been with Creator Jesus. I could see my identity in his incarnation as a brown tribal indigenous relative, even if the church did not. So this indigenous worldview of Mitaka Yeuyasi brings us to a theology of the land and place. Indigenous peoples have had a theology of the land that Western culture doesn't. Since I'm related to all creation, earth is my relative, not property that I dominate. The spiritual connection is so old and deep that we belong to the land. The theology of the land includes our creation stories, which tell us who we are and where we came from. In Lakota, we call the earth Inamaka, Mother Earth, or Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth. Both are kinship terms of deep respect. The Lakota creation story says in part that our ancient ones emerged from the earth in Heslapa, the Black Hills, the place we call the heart of everything that is. The thinking of Indigenous author George Tinker resonates with me, that Native creation stories are our history of experiencing Jesus as creator, who communicated healing and salvation to all his creation. Creator is still everywhere present, doing his work of love. Chesapa is the specific homeland that we are responsible to care for as it cared for us for millennia. We are rooted to that specific place. It is our land covenant and it's not portable. Today it's called Black Hills National Forest, owned by the government, but it's still sacred land to us. Ceremonies are still carried out there, seeking balance and renewal on behalf of all creation, including you. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 promised the Oceti-Sakowin exclusive use of Chesapa, but when gold was discovered in the Black Hills, the government took the land back. In 1941, Mount Rushmore was carved in that sacred place where Tungashi La Shakbe, the six grandfathers, once stood. In 1980, the Supreme Court decided that the government took the land without just compensation and awarded the Oceti-Sakowin $14 million to pay for the land. To date, despite pockets of deep poverty and need, the Oceti-Sakowin has not accepted that payment, which is up to $1.3 billion with interest, because of a theology of the land that one can't own or sell a relative, Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth. We'd rather see Chesapa returned. It's ironic that Black Hills is now a national park, a place meant to be preserved and protected from people so they don't ruin it. Our ancestors lived with that land for thousands of years without ruining it. In fact, settlers wrote of the pristine condition, the wilderness of the land there. And I wonder if wilderness isn't a Euro-Western concept. It was just home. There's a difference between living on the land and with the land. Indigenous peoples everywhere in the world hold a deep relationship and identification with the land. They are a part of creation, not above it. Pulitzer author N. Scott Momaday, who is Kiowa, said, "You cannot separate the Native American from the landscape. It is his spirit. Our spirituality is embodied in the land." So we find a theology of land in Scripture, of course. In the second Hebrew creation story from Genesis 2, Adam was created from Adama, the earth in Hebrew. This seems to say he was the land. Or perhaps another way to say that we are related to Inamaka, Mother Earth. This connection to the land is meant to be deep. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. Jesus' teachings reflected an ancient Semitic worldview that all creation is sacred. The earth is the Lord's, and all that is in it. That's the theology of the land. An indigenous theology of the land is a reciprocal relationship of care and respect. And that means that you don't take something without giving something back, and you don't take more than is needed. If you're walking along and you see a pretty rock on the beach, you just don't pick it up and take it away because you can. You ask permission and you leave a gift. Often the gift is a bit of sacred plant. But my friends told me that when they were chopping down their Christmas tree, they remembered relationship to the land. They didn't have a gift to lay down, so they sang a song. And I thought that was pretty perfect. So these two thoughts, worldview and theology of the land, lay the groundwork for us to understand the devastation that the doctrine of discovery unleashed on indigenous peoples and continues to. We might think about the doctrine of discovery as a period in history, but it still lives. Centuries later, it continues to oppress indigenous people today. This is an important point. We often hear the comment, why can't you just get over it? But you can't get over something that has not stopped. Briefly, the doctrine of Christian discovery sanctified genocide and theft in the 15th century when popes authorized exploring monarchies to, and I quote, capture, vanquish, and subdue the pagans of new lands, put them into perpetual slavery, and take their possessions and property. This vile ideology decided who got to be human, and indigenous non-white peoples were dehumanized and had no human rights. They were denied their humanity because they were not Christian. This ideology is what author and professor Soong-Chan Rah calls a diseased theological imagination that enacted a narrative of white supremacy. In 1776, America presumed that it became a successor nation to the right of discovery and dominion from Great Britain, and the Supreme Court made it legal. Manifest destiny, a phrase coined in 1845, is the idea that the United States is destined by God to expand its dominion and spread democracy and capitalism across North America. In 1823, the Supreme Court reached a landmark decision in Johnson versus McIntosh when it cited the doctrine of discovery to conclude that indigenous peoples do not have a right to property title. They could not legally own their ancestral lands. So stripping property rights from Native peoples made it easy for the government to legally claim the land and begin ethnic cleansing. Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act of 1830 caused tribes to be killed or violently removed from their ancestral homelands. Beginning east of the Mississippi, tribes were driven west to what was called Indian Territory in the area of Oklahoma today. One account of a death march observed that at the end of it, there were no babies or elders left. In this way, the government was able to legally steal the land that had been occupied by indigenous people. Some historians estimate that up to 100 million indigenous inhabitants accomplished in medicine and economy and agriculture and astronomy and more lived here at the time of European contact. So it was never empty land. Genocide, land theft, and colonization is more palatable if you can categorize the victims as savage and pagan. Indian boarding schools exemplify the doctrine's deadly legacy. We will be hearing a lot more about Indian boarding schools as the demand grows to find and repatriate the missing remains of children who died in boarding schools. Return them to their ancestral lands. The boarding schools were a key strategy in forced assimilation. In the US, between 1869 and 1960, there were 367 schools in 29 states. Overall, it is estimated that 150,000 children were sent to remote boarding schools, and deaths are estimated up to 40,000. The government transferred the administration of these boarding schools, labor camps, over to church denominations. Christian people who knew the correct belief of Imago Dei didn't apply it to Native children. Orthodoxy trumped orthopraxy. They were able to compartmentalize their theology in favor of the racialized ideology of the doctrine of discovery. Some settlers say they wanted to evangelize natives, but colonizing for Jesus has always been about the land, as a profitable commodity, not as a relative. This cruel experiment in assimilation created intergenerational trauma that we are still trying to heal from. The boarding schools destroyed the traditional pattern of rearing children, which is for them to learn the essential skills and values and language from the right relatives at the right times in the land of their creation stories, land that has names and meanings. Grandparents, aunties, and uncles all had a role in raising children. That pattern was broken in boarding schools, and the surviving children were raised in horrific trauma. As parents, they could only pass that trauma on to the next generations. And that trauma didn't end when the boarding schools closed. Descendants carry a blood memory now referred to as epigenetics. Scientific studies show that the inherited DNA and the epigenetic instructions that ride that DNA like a ghost gene convey intergenerational trauma, called historical trauma response, or HTR. This is a biological explanation for the inherited effects of colonial trauma. HTR can also be seen in descendants of African slaves, Japanese internees, and Holocaust victims. And I'm sure it will be in the children, the brown children at the border who were separated from their parents. As we reclaim our cultures, we reclaim our health. Today, the massive lie of the doctrine of discovery continues to oppress Indigenous peoples. Author Sarah Augustine wrote in her book, The Land is Not Empty, that the same process that unfolded in North America 150 years ago is happening today, right now, around the world. Indigenous peoples still have no legal claim to their ancestral lands and are being poisoned, brutalized, and removed by extractive industries for the land and the resources. Water protectors in America are now criminalized for protesting against oil pipelines. Butterfly defenders in Mexico, forest defenders in Ecuador, and land protectors in the Amazon are all being murdered for defending the land and to enable extraction. And this is all legal due to laws based on the doctrine of discovery. From an Indigenous perspective, there is a strong correlation between how the land is treated and how women are treated. Traditionally, women are honored as life and culture carriers. In Lakota, the word for woman is wi'a, a word rooted in the word wi, which is sun, a source of life. In today's extractive economic worldview, 1 in 3 Native women have experienced rape. And when Native women are murdered up to 10 times the national rate. This has created a nightmare called missing and murdered Indigenous women. The jurisdictional maze of tribal, state, and federal authorities created dead ends for families that were looking for their missing loved ones. Slow baby steps to provide legal and structural support have begun, like reauthorizing VAWA, Violence Against Women Act. But this issue needs much more attention. May 5th is the National Day of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Awareness, and my niece brought flyers out on the table if you're interested. We have also broken right relationship with the natural world with our toxic ways. A few years ago, if you remember, in the Pacific Northwest, we saw a mother orca grieve her dead calf for 17 days. She carried her calf's body through 1,000 miles of water, lifting it for us all to see. That was an extraordinarily long ceremony of grief with a clear message for us. Our toxic ways are poisoning the community of creation, including ourselves. We are daily confronted by racism, dehumanization, patriarchy, and white supremacy. We are in a never-ending lament over the number of relatives murdered by white supremacy. Leviticus 18 warns that the land can become defiled by the actions of the people, and the land vomits them out. What happens when people do not live in a good way? Unchi Maka was created with agency, and we fail to honor that. She is working hard to find balance as we see extreme weather, earthquakes, loss of species, and climate distress. Unchi Maka can survive without mankind, not the other way around. So in closing, Sungchan Ra's teaching comes to mind about how human experience, particularly our theology, shapes our imagination of how we relate to this world and the possibilities of what it might and should be. I trust that Creator overcame death for all creation so that the entire community of creation, all the relatives will have salvation healing. It's our responsibility to cooperate with Creator's work of love, restoring right relationship where we are. Indigenous thinking can offer a balanced and healing worldview that creates something bigger than Eurocentric theology and individualistic worldview. Can we see the world through the magnitude of Creator's lens of interconnected, interdependent relationships throughout all creation? This possibility keeps me going. Living in this world is not about a linear orthodoxy of restoration at the end. It's about the continuous orthopraxy of finding balance, of being a good relative now. Creator's Spirit is everywhere present, always working out a healing, redemptive purpose. Tungashila wapila tankai chichie. We give you all our thanks, Creator. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Can I have my team come up, please? We talked about this, but thank you so much, Lenore. Really appreciate it. We've had a full, rich day. I'm struck by today in the magnitude that it has become. First, to the Dreamers idea from our little old CCDA Pacific Northwest Zoom calls that have been going on for a year and a half, when Rudy Carrasco, who's also on our committee that is not here today, said, what about having a conference? All of me said no. To less than a year, maybe like 6 months' time, actually planning and executing then this first CCDA Pacific Northwest Regional Conference, to having over 80 persons come out to commit and spending a whole day with us in learning, networking, and imagining. And then on today to be uplifted in full worship, to be challenged and convicted, exchanging ideas and making new connects, and also hopefully encouraged by community as we gather. And so we want to give so many thanks and appreciation to Michelle Lang-Raymond and Stillwater and our worship team, our panelists, Michelle, Elizabeth, and Priscilla Perkins. To Joyce Del Rosario and Lenore, 3 stars. Our workshop leaders, Lynn McCrae, John Hull, and Derek Lane. Thank you to you all who have filled our day with participation here. And up here with me is the planning committee. We have Lisa Ellis, Derek Lane, John Hull, Steve Burry, myself, Kanisha Warren, and then Rudy Carrasco, who is unable to be here. Big thanks to my staff and the volunteer team, the JPC staff, Michael Chu, and union staff, Kelsey Roram, Angel Chang, Alex Booker, and Lisa Ishihara. And setup team, Mike Davis, Tom Jack, Diana Robinson, Julie Bowers, Akshara Kumar, and Regan Crawford. Before I offer our benediction for tonight, I'm going to have Steve and John say a little word about our Go and Sees tomorrow.
Yeah, when we realized that we were doing a regional conference and that meant bringing people from quite a distance, we didn't want to just say, great, 8:30 at night, good luck getting home, see you, out. And for those that were staying overnight or those that are in town, we wanted to offer this idea that we hear about when you go to a national convention, they do these go and see, I call them come and sees for the longest time, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so we're offering 2 go and see events, one in the South End at Urban Impact, And there's on the back table, there's some sheets you can take with you if you decide to come. You need an address and gives contact information. And in the north end at Everett Gospel Mission. Any special directions in getting there?
The address is on the paper. Just come up north, we're right off the freeway, so it's pretty easy to get to. And we're going to start the tour. We're going to do a tour of the facility. So it's a little unique in what we offer up there at the Everett Gospel Mission. You'll have a chance to see a new pallet shelter implementation, which are newer methodologies in homeless services as well. We have some unique things inside our congregate shelter to share, and then we'll move over to our admin building and just spend some time reflecting on today and thinking about applying GA principles and CCD practices in a little bit more of a north and maybe more suburban, rural setting. This is going to be our concentration tomorrow.
And Urban Impact will be in the south end of Seattle, and our team is prepared to host, and I have different members of our team that will share kind of the 5 areas of ministry that we have been focused on. And if you want to get kind of a prep idea, you can check out the Urban Impact Seattle.org website. But we'll be starting at 9 o'clock and also kind of doing some similar touring and then dialogue and gathering at the end of the day to kind of debrief and have you out before we have to buy you lunch.
That's it. Although you can always have lunch at our facility.
Yes.
So I'm going to send you out with a creative benediction, and hopefully it also gives a little reminder of your recap for today. We come being thankful that, as Joyce said, Dr. Perkins opened our missional imagination. May we carry the visions forward from the foundations that have been laid and those we are building. May we be a community of leaders that does not subscribe to performative progress. May we lean into and take note of this Kairos moment for the church and for our communities. May we teach and learn as we go and be intentional towards the space we create along the way. May we explore in order to understand our worldview, knowing there is no culture-free gospel. May we seek to be a good relative and a good neighbor as we live with each other and with the land. Go in peace.